Bonjour. Hello. I hope you've been enjoying our CIB Day so far. Bienvenue à l'Assemblée publique annuelle de la Banque de l'Infrastructure du Canada. Je m'appelle Frédéric Duguay. Je suis l'avocat général et le secrétaire de la Banque et je serai votre animateur de cérémonie aujourd'hui. En tant que société d'État, nous comprenons que cette Assemblée publique annuelle est importante pour l'ensemble des Canadiens et Canadiennes. Cet événement est une initiative de responsabilisation que nous prenons très au sérieux. L'Assemblée est également accessible dans les 2 langues officielles. Nous vous remercions de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Welcome to the CIB's annual public meeting. My name is Frédéric Duguay. I am the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary here at the CIB, and I will be your MC today. As a Crown Corporation, we understand that this annual public meeting is important for all Canadians. This event is an accountability initiative that we take very seriously. It's also available in both official languages, and we thank you very much for joining us today, and for those of you who also joined us earlier today in our earlier sessions. Thank you for being here. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land we are hosting today's meeting from is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Nous reconnaissons également que Toronto est couvert par le traité 13 avec les Mississaugas du Credit. Today's session will proceed as follows. We'll begin with remarks from our interim chair, Jane Bird, followed by a presentation by our CEO, Ehren Cory. Mr. Cory will cover the accomplishments of the CIB over the past year and talk about what lies ahead for the CIB in the future. This presentation will be followed by a question and answer session available to all participants. To ask a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We also invite all attendees registered as of Thursday, June 30th, to submit any questions in advance. Thank you for those who took the time to submit your questions in advance. Cette réunion est présentée en français et en anglais. Si vous préférez participer dans l'autre langue, choisissez Interprétation dans vos commandes Zoom. This meeting is presented in French and English. If you would prefer to participate in the other official language, please choose Interpretation in your Zoom controls. For your awareness, today's session is also being recorded. If you are joining us via webcast and would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box on your screen to type and submit your question, and the second part of the meeting will proceed in a Q&A question and answer format, and we invite you to please submit your questions. If we have any members of the press joining us today, we welcome you to address your questions directly to the CIB's media team at our email address being media@cib-bic.ca. Now, to share more information on the accomplishments of the past year, please welcome to my left, or my right, sorry, I got mixed up here. I usually sit on the right. But Jane Bird, our chair of our board, and thank you and welcome for joining us today.
Thank you, Frédéric, and welcome to everyone who's joining us from across Canada. If you were able to join us for the market update earlier today, thank you, and thank you also if you were able to join our breakout sessions. We very much look forward to taking your questions, but please allow Ehren and I to provide you a little bit of a perspective on what CIB has been doing over the past year to deliver Canadian infrastructure. Having worked on major infrastructure projects for more than 25 years, I speak from personal experience when I say, certainly as regards infrastructure, we are at a moment in time where what we do today will determine our future prosperity. Infrastructure, whether it's ports and transit lines, or water or wastewater systems, or transmission, will play a critical role in Canada's future. It will affect issues as fundamental as our ability to ship Canadian goods to international markets, heat our homes and businesses, and grow our crops. Today, I'm going to comment on three things. One, the results that we've seen over the past year and to date with our partners across the country. Secondly, how we're trying to innovate to address current challenges and policies of our shareholder, the federal government. And finally, provide a couple of examples where I think we're trying to mature as an entity that's now been in place for 6 years. I think after these 6 years, the CIB has demonstrated that our unique model has been an important way to advance materially the progress of infrastructure projects in Canada. Our results speak for themselves. We've invested $13 billion into infrastructure that will have real and lasting impact for Canadians. This takes shape in 73 investments to date. That's $36 billion in total capital cost in energy, transportation, connectivity, and improved standards of living across the country. We've built a team of experts, strong industry networks, and a robust pipeline of opportunities for continued investment, and we're poised to continue our journey of growth. This year, the CIB has demonstrated how we can quickly respond to the challenges facing our nation. A couple of examples. The 2023 federal budget included a provision for us to develop an opportunity to provide Indigenous communities with access to capital to purchase equity stakes in infrastructure projects in which the CIB is also investing, helping to close the Indigenous infrastructure gap and create opportunities for long-term benefit. I'm pleased to say that our first Indigenous equity investment, the Nova Scotia Battery Storage Project, was closed shortly after in February of 2024. In the 2023 CIB Statement of Priorities and Accountabilities, Minister Fraser challenged us to explore actions to facilitate investment in Canada's national housing supply and contribute to building more affordable and sustainable housing options for Canadians. Again, within 6 months, we had announced our Infrastructure for Housing initiative and our first partnership. We continue to be the federal government's primary financing arm for supporting a transition to cleaner energy, a responsibility that has led to 10 new power investments in the past 6 years. And finally, on the topic of a maturing entity, a couple of examples. 2 developments. First, we're working on our execution of transactions to be as efficient as possible for our clients and to ensure that we are delivering deals in as efficient and transparent a way as possible. And secondly, we're building our asset management team. Why? Because, happily, we have assets to manage. The sign of a maturing organization for sure. Turning to sustainability, I think it's fair to say that sustainability is in the CIB's DNA, and we continue to advance our efforts there. As preparation for climate impacts becomes of increasing importance to Canadian communities, this year our team completed a review of climate-related risks to better understand the impact of various scenarios on our existing portfolio and pipeline of future investments. This work reinforces the role the CIB can play in helping Canada to manage climate transition and achieve GHG reduction objectives. Importantly, we also created the first CIB task force on climate-related financial disclosures. This industry-standard framework will help the CIB evaluate our strategies and actions related to climate, identify areas for improvement, and in the process ensure better investment decisions. To better reflect the impact our investments will have for individual Canadians, significant work has also been done to refine the way we measure and report our key performance indicators. Unlike a traditional investment firm, CIB projects are certainly considered on a fiscal basis, but are also measured by outcomes beyond the financial, on how we're contributing to reduced emissions, increasing transit ridership, and enabling more families to connect to broadband. As the challenges facing our country and the work that we do continue to evolve, we have also been working to make sure that we're reporting on our results accurately. Starting this year, our analysis and reporting will demonstrate how the CIB is driving GDP and trade and how we're contributing to jobs and housing investments for Canadians. And finally, turning to governance, the board worked with manager to further refine our investment processes, conducted reviews on more than 30 investments, and has approved portfolio allocations and reviewed CIB's long-term impact objectives. The board also reviews reports on asset management, as I was mentioning, including financing provided, project schedule, and construction milestones. The board of directors continuously monitors the CIB's governance and policies to ensure they are informed and aligned with the values and ethics, as well as aligned with the best practices in both the public and private sectors. To this end, the board of directors reviews its practices regarding values and ethics, as well as preventing conflicts of interest. As a federal Crown corporation, we continue to engage directly with the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, Sean Fraser, Deputy Minister Kelly Gillis, and their teams. In addition to regular discussions with the minister has met directly with the board to listen to our insights and discuss future areas of opportunity to invest in the infrastructure Canada needs. I would like to close today by thanking our board of directors. This is a board with deep knowledge of Canada's infrastructure landscape, as well as governance and financial expertise. I would like to first recognize the contributions of Tamara Vrooman, who served as the chair of the board for 3 years before stepping down in January. The board offers our sincere thanks and appreciation to Tamara for her leadership and guidance, and we celebrate her contributions to our accomplishments. I would also like to thank Dave Bronconnier, André-Lise Méteau, Poonam Puri, and Stephen Smith for the time, experience, and counsel they have provided to the CIB during their tenures on the board. Thank you in particular to Dave, Poonam, and Stephen for their participation since the inaugural board in 2017, and to Stephen Smith for chairing the Human Resources and Governance Committee during his tenure. We are pleased to announce our 4 new directors to the CIB board, following a selection process guided by Minister Fraser over the last several months. I'd like to welcome Janice Byrne, Elizabeth Yvon, Vince Gasparo, and Hari Subramanian, and we look forward to their contributions and vast experience as we move forward. The CIB Board of Directors is made up of experts from across the country and across the industry with deep knowledge of infrastructure, finance, and governance. We're fortunate to have them, and I deeply appreciate their leadership and commitment. With that, I'd like to congratulate Ehren and his team for their exceptional progress at this 6-year mark. And I'll turn the screen over to Ehren to provide a little more detail. I generally stay at the high level, and Ehren goes a little deeper.
Excellent. Well, I will endeavor to do so. Thank you, Jane, and thanks, Frederick. Bonjour et bon après-midi à toutes et à tous, partout dans le pays. Nous vous remercions de l'intérêt que vous portez à en savoir plus sur la BIC. Thank you for being here and thank you for your interest. Je suis heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui pour partager des informations sur nos progrès au cours de l'exercice 2023-24 et répondre aux questions que vous pourriez avoir. J'aimerais commencer par dire que je suis extrêmement fier du travail accompli par notre équipe au cours de l'année écoulée. Nous avons réalisé des progrès considérables, ce qui renforce le fait que la BIC est une organisation agile et réactive qui contribue à faire avancer le développement des infrastructures au profit de la population canadienne. Jane, thank you for your and the board's work. I couldn't agree more. We are really lucky as an organization to have the deep expertise of the board. My personal thanks to Tamara as well. I have had the pleasure of working with some incredible board chairs over my tenure, present company included, and Tamara was a great one, a great mentor, and a great source of leadership for our organization as you have continued to be. And I feel honored and privileged to get to work with a board that brings the depth of expertise and knowledge that we have. So thank you, and thanks to all. As Jane said, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about our results from the year past. Some of this I've covered in previous hits, including the market update earlier, but I will keep it brief and, of course, welcome any questions. As Jane talked about, we really have hit our stride in our maturing organization with our investments now over 73 at the end of fiscal year 23-24, and just over $13 billion of our money committed. If you double click just on the year that passed, though, I just wanted to talk about numbers for a second. As the slide you can see now shows, we, in the fiscal year just passed, reached close on 27 projects with an investment value from the CIB of $3.5 billion, project total capital cost of about $8 billion. These are projects in all 5 of our priority sectors and span the length of the country. And they included, as Jane mentioned, some really innovative projects, first of their kinds, and some of those are highlighted on this slide. Our Nova Scotia Energy project, our investment in airports, which we were new for us, and a number of interesting partnerships that drive both energy transition and economic productivity and growth. So we're really excited about the depth and breadth. Let me give you a few specific examples and highlights of our investments. First, as you hear from the CIB, one of the priority areas for us is around infrastructure to the benefit of and in participation with Indigenous communities. As at year end, we have now reached 15 investments with Indigenous partners, and we crossed the halfway mark towards our initial goal of $1 billion of the CIB's money invested in those projects. We're just over $500 million. This milestone is an important one for us. As I often say, the $1 billion is our initial target and is a floor, not a ceiling. Nonetheless, we're really excited and proud to have crossed the halfway mark, be over $500 million in Indigenous investment commitments. And we look forward to getting the rest of the way there, given the incredible work of our teams and the incredible need for infrastructure in Indigenous communities. As I spoke about earlier, a number of our investments really were firsts, and I just want to double click on some of Jane's comments. If you are looking at the slide, there's a project in the top right corner, the Brandon and RSR Red Sand Rat Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Project. That's in southern Manitoba and Brandon. This was a direct outcome of our work on how what we call our Infrastructure for Housing Initiative, or IHI, how you can think about investments in water and wastewater treatment facilities, roads, local electricity distribution, how you can think of those as the enablements to new housing in our country. As Jane outlined, the minister last fall challenged us with this idea: what can the CIB be doing to get the infrastructure built that opens up housing? And our commitments with Brandon and RSR are the first of those types of investments. In the case of Brandon, it was an aging end-of-life water system that needed reinvestment, but it also needed significant enhancement to meet the population growth expectations of Brandon. So we made an investment with the city that allows that infrastructure to get built, the existing to be replaced, and to be upsized to drive significant new housing in Brandon. And RSR, which is a water and wastewater system serving a number of communities south of Winnipeg, experiencing incredible growth. Again, there we were really building a next generation system that met the growing needs of those communities and enabled them to continue to build with the ambition that they have. So those types of projects, I think, are really important. We'll see even more of them in the year ahead, and we're very excited and proud of them. As I talked about earlier today, and you can see on the slide, we've also had a number of interesting investments in the trade and transportation space. Things like our export facility, the first port investment we made with the Port of Prince Rupert, which closed in 23-24, we're extremely excited about, as well as both the Thompson Airport and the Montreal Metropolitan Airport, two new ways to connect more Canadians, create new transit options and transportation options in ways that are both economically important and socially important because they connect this large country of ours. It's worth noting that of our 73 investments, over 40 are in active construction. The remainder would be projects that are in procurement of long lead items, finalizing design, early stage, about to enter construction. But the point I'm making is our portfolio is really moving forward. And at the other end of that spectrum, 2 projects are complete. A number of others are in partial service. Projects are starting to repay. And we are starting now to see the other end of the investment funnel, as Jane said, increasingly turning our attention to the ongoing management of that portfolio. That also creates opportunities to reinvest those proceeds into the next generation of infrastructure projects, that flywheel of activity, which was really at the heart of the idea that is the CIB. Financial results I'd like to highlight in the past year, an important, several important notes. Actual funding out to date was $1.3 billion of capital in 23-24. That is, of course, ramping up. It trails the volume of investments quite naturally, but as the pace of construction activity is happening, you're really seeing that number ramp up. As you can see, the year-end total was $1.3 billion. It's worth noting More than 500 million of that was in Q4. So if you look at the trajectory, it's really accelerating. And as we look quarter to quarter moving forward, that is the norm now. That is the draw rate that we're seeing from our projects, which is a real indication of construction happening in the field and projects drawing. I can report to you on our interest income, as we now have investments that are earning interest income. We realized $59 million of interest income, and interestingly, and of important note, you can compare that against our operating expenses of $55 million. So we have crossed the threshold where our interest income actually surpasses our operating expenses. That is an important financial milestone, and as Jane said, we measure every investment, of course, both from a fiscal perspective. We look at the risk and the financial payback and outcomes. So this is not tell the full story of the CIB, but it is a really important marker and milestone, one we're really proud to have crossed. The other thing I'll say about financials, it's worth putting in context, $55 million in operating expenses, and what that means. Well, if you were to compare it to our financial closes, it represents about 1.5% of the investments we're making. Having benchmarked our operating costs relative to other wide range of institutional investors, pension funds, asset managers, we are running quite lean and using taxpayers' money efficiently and effectively with a relatively small team deploying a relatively high amount of capital. I'd like to talk about something we don't always cover, especially in public forums like this, but a really important part of our annual results, which is around our work as a center of expertise, our advisory services, and research work. So, first, very important to think about the CIB as having three interrelated business lines. Our investments, which I've been talking about and which are often the focus of our discussions. Secondly, we provide project advisory work on both projects that are in our investment funnel and potential future projects. This includes meeting with potential project proponents, governments at all levels, and indigenous communities, provincial and territorial governments, municipalities, and private sector operators to review their projects, discuss potential deal structures that could work, discuss ways that CIB could help, and often that leads to things like advisory services or advisory work together on the project and on fleshing out, for instance, what is the revenue potential of the project, and therefore is there an investable opportunity. We also started this year a new initiative around advisory work, which we call our FEED investment program. This is around the CIB making loans to projects, especially in energy transition spaces where there are significant upfront engineering costs before the project reaches a final investment decision, where the CIB is willing to partner and has made its first partnership with Azure around a sustainable aviation fuel, a project we're really excited about. So this is a new offering in 23-24, a new way for the CIB to go beyond providing its advisory support and actually co-investing with our partners in doing the hard work leading to an investment decision. If the project proceeds, our FEED investment rolls into our overall loan, and if the project doesn't, we share in the risk of that with our partners. Third element I'd point out is our research work, and the CIB funds and is a participant in a wide range of research and a growing amount of this. We view this as the front end. If you think of the funnel of investments from research and identifying opportunities through the advisory work and eventually investments, the research work plays a critical role in helping us to understand where the infrastructure needs of the country sit and where the CIB can be most impactful. Recent research projects in 23-24 included our land value capture study, which we did with the Infrastructure Institute at U of T, looking at new ways to fund transit across our country. Our work with the Atlanta Economic Council, which was all about infrastructure needs in Atlantic Canada and where for both economic productivity and energy transition investments are most needed. We've done work with QTRIC, who've been a great partner, the Canadian Urban Transit Research Institute, around non-traditional modes of transportation, what the next generation of public transit might look like. All of those projects serve to help advance our thinking and eventually move real projects into our pipeline. So we often say we're not a think tank. We are very much an applied research institute. Our job is to partner with great thinkers to help seed the next generation of infrastructure projects in our country, and that's what we've been doing through our Center of Expertise. We spent a lot of work engaging with our shareholders and stakeholders across the country. This page brings me great joy because it shows pictures of us from coast to coast to coast, talking with our stakeholders. We have made it a real priority as a CIB to be as open, transparent, and available as we can. And I think the fruits of that are showing through our speaking engagements across the country, our meetings with over 100 industry and stakeholder groups over the course of the year, our meetings with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments from across the country, our engagement with leading industry stakeholder groups, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, etc. Large, important partners who are playing a major role in shaping the infrastructure dialogue in our country. We have made it a priority to work closely with those partners and to engage directly with Canadians and to hear about their infrastructure needs and to be better aimed at the problems and challenges our country faces. That included some, in addition to the many conferences, panels, meetings that we held, we've also really increased our regional visits and participation. We conducted 2 regional tours, by which I mean we mobilized a significant number of CIB team members from across the organization, investments, research, strategy team, and myself, to go and visit with stakeholders and spend a week in communities where we don't have offices. Last year, that included our time in the Saskatoon area, where we met with First Nations partners on projects at both Kakwista Landing and Grasswoods. We met with the First Nations Bank of Canada, provincial leaders, and others. And then in the winter, we were in Halifax, where, again, a wide range of meetings with our partners in the energy sector, with both municipal and provincial governments, and industry stakeholders. And this is matched by visits and outreach in Manitoba, Quebec City, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary that we've conducted over the course of the last year. The CIB's goal is truly to be the Canada Infrastructure Bank. That means being out talking to Canadians, talking to other levels of government and private sector proponents of projects across this country, and we plan on doing much more of that in the year ahead. Speaking of which, let me just end by looking ahead a little bit. So, I was asked this question earlier today, and I think it's a really good one. Is what you're seeing now, the results I just talked about from the year, does that represent more or less a steady state for the CIB? And the answer is yes. I think what we have landed on is that there is a steady pipeline of investment opportunities, of real projects that deliver real value to Canadians, that the CIB will continue to invest in, and every year that will be in the range of our money, $3 to $5 billion. That represents projects in the $8 to $10 billion range. That robust pipeline across the country in all 5 of the sectors we're currently involved in, we think that is very much the pace of the machinery that we have built. That is, most importantly, the pace at which the country can digest projects. It's the pace at which projects are coming to market. It's the pace at which our labor markets can handle. And if you look at the sectors we're in and the types of projects we're doing, revenue generating with private sector participation, that represents a significant percentage of those projects. Looking forward, we have a robust pipeline of projects in every one of our 5 sectors and in every province and territory, I would add. An important push for us in the year ahead is around engaging in the north. If you looked at the map that Jane had on the screen and I had with many dots covering the country, a keen eye would say there are not enough dots in the north. We would agree. We have so far only of our 73 investments, 3 that are in the north, and we look forward to increasing that number. We think that starts with building a clearer pipeline of the priorities of the territories, working with Indigenous leaders and government leadership in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and Yukon, as well as northern Quebec and the other northern regions of Canada. Second big area of priority for us, for sure, is around electrification and getting our grid greener and meeting the doubling to tripling of electricity need that's coming in this country. And thirdly, as mentioned, we think this year ahead is going to be a year where our infrastructure, our enabling infrastructure for housing initiative is going to really hit pace. as we engage with municipal leaders and the development community around the opportunities that they see. Okay, I'd just like to end with a quick note to say how incredibly proud I am of the organization that we collectively have been building together. We are really, every day, come to work, try and live by the mantra of being proud but never satisfied. This idea that we're trying to create a long-lasting institution that delivers real value to Canadians is what motivates and drives an organization that has now grown to about 140 people in Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal, or at least that's where the business cards say they are. They are often crisscrossing this country. Je suis fier du travail accompli par notre équipe pour mettre en œuvre notre valeur, améliorer les choses pour le Canada, make things better for Canada. This is a value that we have truly embraced as an organization. Dans ce Canada, les gens sont connectés les uns aux autres et au reste du monde. C'est un pays alimenté par l'innovation, un pays compétitif et prospère sur le plan économique. It is thanks to the excellence, competence, and passion of the people that have joined the CIB that we are achieving the results we are, and we will continue to do so with determination, knowing that our work is far from over. Je tiens à remercier toute l'équipe et à reconnaître ses réalisations. Thanks to all of the staff, thanks to the board, thank you, Jane. Frederick, back to you for questions.
Merci beaucoup, Ehren, pour la mise à jour de nos faits saillants, nos résultats et nos perspectives à l'avenir. Merci, Jane, aussi, pour les commentaires au nom du conseil d'administration. Nous allons maintenant procéder à notre période de questions. We'll now proceed to our Q&A. As I mentioned earlier at the outset, our Q&A will follow two parts. And for the first part, we will begin by addressing questions that were submitted in advance for Ehren and Jane's comments. We'll then move to the second part with respect to the questions that we are receiving as part of this meeting, and we invite you to use the text box function through your Zoom application to provide Q&As. We will try to go through as many questions as we can as part of this meeting. So let's begin. Are we ready?
Absolutely.
Both of you on my right.
You've got it now.
We haven't moved. Here we are. Yeah.
Okay, first question comes from the list that was submitted earlier before the APM began. What are the priorities for investment leading into the 2024-2025 fiscal year? We'll direct that to Ehren and Jane.
Sure. So, thank you for the question. I'll start with a high-level answer and then get specific, so bear with me. But the framework is important. Something that I think we've really, over the 6 years of operation, ironed out is how to think about the CIB as an independent crown that makes investments decisions in a commercial way, where our management team and board work together to put taxpayers' money to good use, and do so in a way that is aligned to the public policy goals of the day, and that takes as our starting point the priorities that the board and our shareholder, as represented by the minister, have agreed to. So I think what we've gotten really good at is there used to be this sense of, we're arm's length, so there's a big difference between independence and isolation. And I would say we are an independent organization that does not work in isolation. We work actually in close coordination with other crowns, with departments of government who have important policy goals. For instance, we did not, on our own, start to invest in small modular reactors. That was linked to a very clear government policy and priority. I say that as preamble because the question asked, what are the priority sectors for investment? Well, the answer is, our corporate plan, which we submit and which the shareholder approves, is our way to align with the shareholder, align with the Government of Canada, that we are working on the right areas of infrastructure. Nothing has changed in our 5 priority sectors. Those are around clean transit, trade and transportation corridors that grow economic productivity in the country, building a clean electricity grid, so generation, storage, and transmission. 4th, broadband connectivity and making sure every Canadian has high-speed internet access. and fifth, what we call green infrastructure. So at the highest level, those 5 sectors have not changed. What continuously evolves is the subsectors within each of those. So in green infra, for instance, we're doing and seeing more and more things in our pipeline in the water and wastewater space, because many times in communities across this country, building permits aren't being issued because they don't have water resources that the development could access. So the sectors are quite actually stable. It's the subsectors that aren't. And so I'll talk about 3 subsectors that I think are big priorities for 2024-25. One is housing enabling infra. And what that is varies across the country. Sometimes it's transit that opens up new housing development. Sometimes it is water and wastewater. Sometimes it's local electricity, like microgrid or district energy type of investments. But that infra and its link to housing, I think, is one big theme for us. Second, we are seeing more and more opportunities for investment in new clean electricity that engages Indigenous communities in the ownership of that infrastructure. So our Indigenous equity loans, I think, will be a big, important thing we're doing. And if you look across the country right now, from Nova Scotia to Saskatchewan to British Columbia, there are, and many points in between, there are significant pushes going on to build the grid we're going to need to meet our electricity needs. So that's, I think, a second big priority area for us. Third is our H-Tech investment, which was mentioned on one of the slides, that which is around hydrogen, our Azure work on sustainable aviation fuel, the incredibly transformative projects that we're engaged with on the east and west coasts of Canada to create new supply of green energy. Think of the number of the developments going on in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, for instance, around green hydrogen or low carbon fuels. I think those are going to continue to be really important areas for investment for us. I think the H-Tech investment in hydrogen production and distribution is a really interesting one, and I think there will be more of that to come. So there's 3 that I think will be, but as I said, the sectors haven't changed, but the mix in the subsectors, I think, continues to evolve, and we're just being responsive to the needs of projects in the country.
And Hilary, if I could just add a couple of tag-along observations there. One, the corporate plan, for those that are interested in the detail, is on the website, so you can always read the corporate plan. But I think the corporate plan, as someone who's been on the board since the inauguration of the bank, has evolved to really reflect, as Ehren suggested, a very mature and quite active dialogue between our ministry, certainly, but also other ministries, as he mentioned, and the bank senior team. And so what I'm so proud of in the corporate plan is that it does reflect that dialogue, and it reflects the priorities of the day of the government, with the expertise that I think our team brings around how we can structure transactions. The only other thing I wanted to add on the Indigenous equity point, which I agree with you, I think the board is looking forward as that initiative develops. But just to remember that we have at least one, you'll remind me if there's more than one, I think just one, but you will see this in the future, where we invest in the project in some way, subordinated debt perhaps, and in the same project, make a loan to First Nations who in turn invest in that project. So when we talk about making loans for Indigenous investment, sometimes they're in parallel with our own investment in that project. And I think that kind of, as our old friend Tamara Verman used to say, double word score, is going to see, there you go, Tamara, that kind of double word score I think we're going to see a little bit more of as we move forward.
Absolutely.
Jane and Ehren, you both spoke about the corporate plan as a tool for receiving direction or input from the shareholder. We have a question online from Richard Rysek. He's asking, is that a way to shelter from political interference?
I didn't hear that. Can you just repeat that, Hilary? I didn't hear.
Yep. The question from Richard is, how do you shelter from political interference?
Okay.
And would that relate to the corporate plan?
Yeah, thanks.
We may again piggyback each other. I think that's a very important thing to think about. And what I would say is this: the maturing of our organization that Jane talked about, what that means for us on a day-to-day basis, we've got a really healthy and good relationship, extremely collaborative, as Jane said, with our shareholder as represented by the minister and by the Department of Infrastructure, but also healthy working relationships with ISED, who we collaborate with on Broadband, NRCan, who we collaborate with on things like enabling critical minerals, Transport Canada, who we've worked with across a number of files. And I think that, as I said earlier, that level of collaboration is what Canadians need out of us. What they don't need is the runaround of knock on that door and then that door. They're looking for solutions. And so I think it's important that we're integrated in the way we think about these things and remain completely independent in the way we structure transactions, the commercial structures we employ, the projects we say yes and no to. That is why we're a Crown Corporation. And so, yeah, I think, Richard, to answer the question, that is exactly the mechanism. Something like the corporate plan has allowed us to do. It's have a really good dialogue with the shareholder on priorities, and then to draw the line and draw a box around those priorities, and then for the management team, our investment group, and the many people in our organization, and our board, to then move on from those priorities and do the right deals in the right ways that manage risk, that take a healthy amount of risk, but also manage it appropriately, that balance fiscal returns and public returns. That is what we are set up to do, and I think we've got a really mature and high-functioning relationship where that's what the shareholder counts on us to do.
And I will tag on, Hillary. Just to say, as Ehren mentioned, there's a real role for the board in this conversation as well. And I can say that we've had healthy debates at the board, as I think is appropriate, around whether particular investments fit squarely within our mandate. Frederick and his team, we have a whole appendix that comes with an investment decision to our board that goes into quite a lot of detail, I would say, about our mandate and how this relates back to our act, to the statement of priorities that the minister issues, to the corporate plan. And there are, as one could imagine, given the breadth of opportunities, there have been some pretty healthy debates about is this within that subsector or not? And often, I think, just to conclude, I think there have been times when we've said, with candor to our colleagues, no, that's probably not a good fit from a legal or legislative perspective. But what if we did it another way so that we could help, but in a slightly different way than you've proposed, and be very comfortably within our mandate? And I think that kind of conversation is what we're talking about when we're talking about a mature conversation.
We had a question earlier, and I see it here again from Elia QP. Why is the CIB required to attract private investment in public-private partnerships and other privatization schemes? Why can't we change its privatization mandate?
Well, there's lots in that question. I appreciate it. Let's start with the obvious. The CIB does not have a privatization mandate. That is actually not part of our goal or something we focus on. What we have is a mandate to get more infrastructure built in the country than would get built otherwise. And so the answer to the first part of the question, private capital is really important. It's important because we have a challenge in Canada. We have depends on the report you pull off the shelf, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of need for the critical infrastructure we need, both to replace aging infrastructure in parts of our country and certainly to meet the challenges of the future, both the challenges of economic prosperity and energy transition. And we can't afford it all. It's actually it's kind of a math point. We can't afford all we want, at least not through the ways we've traditionally funded and financed it. And I would say that every time that we do a project that is not just government money, it's not just a grant, but has private capital, that is increasing the overall pie of financing of projects in this country. It's increasing the balance sheet, if you will, for our country. And I think the reason the CIB was created, and by the way, it's institutions like us in the UK and in Europe and in Asia, and here in Ontario, many are doing the same thing. And I think the idea underlying a lot of that is that the more you can crowd private capital in, the more you can stretch public dollars further. That's what we're after. It's not an ideological issue around privatization. It's a question of how do we stretch public dollars further. It's worth noting our investments really just match the sectors we're in. So like if we're trying to get broadband to a remote northern community, we're making that investment with a private company because the way the internet is delivered in Canada is with ISPs. And they're big and small. Some of them are very entrepreneurial. We're working with a partner called Aero Technology Group on an internet project in northern Alberta to get service to I think, 24 communities, many of them Métis and First Nation settlements, a number of small towns. And we're also working with TELUS and Bell and Rogers in parts of the country to extend their service to places that don't currently have coverage, and lots of ISPs in between. So my point is, we didn't say we want to privatize telecom. We said we want to get internet to people. The way that industry works, we need to work with the private sector. Transit is a very different sector in this country, and the REM is a true partnership between the KES and the government of Quebec and us to get a new transit system built. So we have no mandate around privatization. We work with the assets as they are. What we have is a mandate to crowd in private capital so that we can get more built.
Next question, key risks next year and in the next 5 years to implementation of ambitious infrastructure targets. Can you speak to not only the issues around labor and materials, but some of the more macro world events or political risk?
Want to start, or do you want me to?
I can take a crack.
Sure.
Let me touch on a few just out of the gate here, and then I'm sure Ehren can fill in some of the detail. But standing way back, and I'm a long way from an economist, but I think many economists in recent months have observed that investment capital generally doesn't like risk, especially risk that they're not familiar with controlling. It's one thing to say that an experienced rapid transit consortia will take on the risk to build another rapid transit system. It's another thing entirely to look at the events of the last year and say that they have some confidence in what the next 6 months will bring. So I think it would be remiss of me and remiss of Ehren if we didn't start with just the broad uncertainty in the world. And it's not good for investment, and it's particularly not good for infrastructure investments, which by their very nature are a long time in development and construction. So I think that's the biggest kind of macro thing that I wouldn't call myself an amateur economist, maybe just a Canadian would observe. Secondly, and again, this has been noted before, but I think it's very real for Canada. Regulatory uncertainty is something that causes risk. And again, it's risk that if you're thinking of someone building an infrastructure project, regulatory uncertainty is not a place you want to be. Regulation, sure. Regulatory uncertainty, not so much. So I think the regulatory uncertainty is a problem. I'll just segue for a moment to say that, as Ehren mentioned in an earlier answer, one of the jobs that I think the bank is doing, and increasingly so, and we've kind of discussed it at a board and are encouraging of the team, is we understand in some respects some of the regulatory, not all by any means, but some of the regulatory framework of the federal government. And I think we can provide assistance to proponents in sort of navigating some of that and acting as a little bit of a convener. That's just a kind of sidebar on the regulatory risk. But that would be my second observation. Regulatory risk is going to be a problem going forward. I think there's a way through it, but I think it remains a problem. And then finally, I would just say, again, just looking at infrastructure generally, and then Ehren, you can go into some of the not smaller, but more detailed pieces. I think that the very nature of infrastructure is just inherently risky. As somebody that's sort of lived it and breathed it, it takes a long time to get project approvals, and then it takes a long time to get project funding, especially if it's a combination of private sector and public sector funding. And then it takes a long time to build it, and just by definition then, if you're talking about a REM or you're talking about a transmission line in northern Canada, the mere time frame from concept to investment to construction to commissioning is long, and that just with it brings risk. And what we're trying to do as a bank in various ways, because we have lots of flexibility, is try and dial that risk back best we can in any particular deal. And as Ehren alluded to in his remarks, kind of unstick where things get stuck on, and where they get stuck sometimes is on that risk, sort of that risk reef. And if we can unstick that risk reef by taking some of that on our side of the ledger, so to speak, that's one of the ways I think we've been the most successful.
It's a great segue, because Jane, I think the only thing I would add is when you look in, so you're right about the macro. If you look micro, to me, the thing that, as I look ahead, is perhaps the most confronting is we are a risk-taking investor. And the way we think is as you exactly described, we're trying to help get projects unstuck. You think of electric vehicle charging, it's one of my favorite examples. The way we've made that investment, we are sharing fundamentally in the risk of how quickly EVs get adopted in this country and what the charging patterns of people are. There's a commercial business to be had in electric vehicle charging, and we're trying to support that. And what private capital has said is, if we have to carry all that risk, and by the way, the risk in their business model, as if we were starting our own EV charging company, what we'd say is, gosh, we're exposed to global supply chain risk of lithium. I'm not the miner who's getting that. I'm exposed to the manufacturing of the vehicles. I'm exposed to how much those are sold for. I'm exposed to whether governments continue to provide incentives for people to buy EVs or not. That's a lot of stuff out of my control. And what we've done as the CIB is said, we're going to make a loan that helps you insulate or manage that, okay? That's great. The question you asked, though, Hillary, where it leads me is, we have to be always prudent managers of that risk. It's our job to do that eyes wide open. I think the thing that I worry about sometimes is some of those risks are going to manifest. EV adoption might take longer. Houses might not get built as quickly as we all forecast. We do diligence studies like any good investor does, but it's also our job to help embrace some of that risk. The flip side is some of those risks will manifest. Batteries might struggle in a particularly cold Canadian winter, etc. And so I think our resiliency as an organization, and you were to read our financial reports, I gave you some of the financial highlights, but if you went online and looked at our annual report, you would see we reserve for credit losses. Well, our reserves are higher than the average lender because we are taking risk, and some of it will eventually manifest. And so I think as an institution being resilient to that, helping our shareholder, helping taxpayers understand that is a healthy part of what we've built here is going to be an important part of the CIB story going forward.
Well, we had a couple of questions on risk in the chat here. So, Ehren, I think you've just addressed one of them, which is how are you managing for potential risk in investment projects? But then there's a second one, Jane, and I'm wondering if you and Frédéric want to weigh in on this one. How is the CIB's board providing effective oversight and assessing risk in projects and within the organization?
I want to come at that sort of in two ways. And again, Ehren, on the detail you might want to, but from a board perspective, I want to think about it with two separate lenses. The first is a technical lens. So risk assessment is a, if not fully, certainly relatively quantifiable science. It has a methodology that accounting firms have a standard that they apply when we have an internal audit or an external audit. So the first lens is that I'm going to call it a technical lens, whereby the probability of a risk manifesting and the effect of that probability on our broad portfolio is measured and quantified and presented as part of the regular work that would go on with any investment. And as I say, that's a technical professional stream that has recognized and endorsed methodologies by sort of the accounting world. So that's one. And all of that happens through the CFO and through her credit risk evaluation team, and that's reported out with any investment. And then, as I alluded to earlier, of course, as we move into a kind of an asset management world from alongside an investment world, then how we monitor those risks going forward also has a technical aspect to it. So that's lens one. Lens two is kind of, it's a little bit broader, and I think in lens two we draw on first our management team, who are pretty seasoned at these kinds of investments, and they've seen the practical effects of risk and when they manifest and how they do. Then secondly, our advisors. So as Ehren has indicated, we have technical advisors, particularly in areas where it's an emerging technology, or virtually all of our investments will have some kind of technical expertise in the deal, so to speak, to undertake our due diligence as an investor, as Ehren has alluded to. And then finally, when it comes to the board, and we have the benefit of what management's been thinking about, usually, as I alluded to earlier, for quite a while, because these things don't happen in 48 hours. So they've been thinking about it for quite a while. They've relied on the advice of their advisors. And then there are people at the board who have been wandering around in infrastructure, for good or ill, for quite a long time. And so often you'll hear someone say, well, I understand all the technical piece and I understand what our advisors are saying, but in my experience in that sector, in the freezing cold, I'm not sure you guys have fully absorbed, XYZ transmission line in the middle of February in the Arctic. So should we maybe think about that in more detail? So that's kind of the non-technical trajectory. It comes from the management team, of course, and advisors to the board, and then depending on the investment, we'll have a little bit of a conversation about that at the board as well.
The only thing I think I would add is from the perspective of the board's governance as well. The board spends a lot of time with the management team in terms of reviewing its practices, looking at its charters, ensuring that it gets the right information to facilitate these discussions with management on risks and oversight. And in the past year, a lot of work was done with the management team in reviewing those governance practices and making sure that the information and the conversations are happening at the right level at the board, between the board and its committees.
That's a good point, and I was remiss in saying that it would come directly from management, for example, to the board. Of course, transactions go through both the investment committee, and we have a detailed investment policy, but also through the Finance and Audit Committee, who have, as part of their charter, responsibility for measuring and monitoring credit risk. And so it's sort of a 2 or even 3-part touchdown before it reaches the board, per se.
We have 2 fairly technical questions and a broader question here. I'm going to start with this one. It's from Joseph in the chat. Looking at the bank's focus on areas such as critical minerals, small modular reactors, and hydrogen production, these are not only crucial for infrastructure, but have the potential to be major industries. Is the bank's investment strategy looking to leverage this potential and make Canada a global leader in these areas?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's interesting when we, Jane talked about this a little bit, but it's worth thinking about how we screen investments. So when we look at an investment, we compare the amount of money we're putting in and the risk we're taking against 2 things. One is the financial returns, so the interest we're charging, are we getting paid back? So that netted against the risk tells you the financial or the economics of the project. But the other thing we look at are outcomes. And we publish these and we set targets against them, but we have a core set of outcomes we measure. And those outcomes are really linked, if you were to, at the highest level, they're linked to 2 things. They're linked to energy transition and decarbonizing our economy, and they're linked to GDP growth and competitiveness and productivity. So when we invest in infrastructure, economically productive infrastructure, a port, the road that opens up a new region of the country for mining, like a critical minerals enabling infra, the way we look at that is infrastructure that drives GDP. So to answer the question, absolutely. Now, we are not in the business of growing the hydrogen sector, like we are infrastructure players, but the way we evaluate our investments, the way we measure them, the way we think about them is, this is an investment that's driving economic growth and competitiveness in an area that's important to the Canadian economy. And we're doing it through infrastructure. Like we aren't investors in the mine, we aren't investors in the house. We are investors in the infrastructure that enables those things, but we look at our investments as enabling GDP growth in those sectors. And so, to pick a different example, the question didn't mention it, but if you were looking at some of the low carbon fuels projects on the East Coast, using Canadian wind, converting it to a low carbon fuel and using that both domestically but also internationally, again, we would look at that through the lens, of course, the financial side of the investment, but then from an impact side, we'd look at the GHG emissions reductions in Canada and globally, the GDP impact of those projects, and that is the basis on which we're investing. So yeah, I think that's part and parcel of why we are fundamentally like a development or an impact bank. We are looking at those measures as we make our decisions.
And just to circle back again, and not to double down on it for too long, but just to say that at the level of, are we growing those sectors of the economy, and is there potential for Canada to grow those sectors? Again, it is also part and parcel of that dialogue with our shareholder, right? So if NRCan is saying, from a public policy perspective, we're interested in this particular initiative or doing research on this, or we think that there's some potential over here, as Ehren has said, we're part of the conversation. It's not just us and NRCan. It'll be a broader conversation. And then what we take home as our homework is, where's our slice? What's our piece of that broader initiative? So are we enabling that? We sure hope so. But it's not usually, in fact, it's very rare that you'd see us kind of all by ourselves figuring this out. It's more a question of our expertise, I hope, we hope, being that we can figure out how we can help, get unstuck, or advance, or create something to happen faster than it otherwise would through our deal structure, and then work quickly to get it done.
Well, thank you for responding to those questions. I'll turn it back to Fred.
Thank you very much, Hillary, for moderating. I believe that's all the time that we have for questions today. Merci beaucoup pour votre participation. Ceci met fin à notre période de questions. If you have submitted a question today that was not answered during this meeting, you'll receive a response by email, and we will also share questions and answers on our website at cib.bic.ca. Si vous n'avez pas eu la chance d'avoir eu une réponse à votre question aujourd'hui, nous allons faire en sorte de vous envoyer cette question, une réponse par courriel. Nous allons également publier un sommaire des questions et réponses sur notre site web, donc restez au courant. Nous vous remercions d'avoir assisté à l'Assemblée publique annuelle de la Banque de l'Infrastructure du Canada. Votre intérêt et votre participation sont très appréciés. Thank you very much for attending the Canada Infrastructure Bank's annual public meeting today. We appreciate your interest and participation. Thank you.
Thank you.